They told him he was not enough. Not in those exact words, because people who reject you for being poor rarely say it in those exact words. They say it in the way they look at you when you walk into a room. They say it in the way the conversation changes when your circumstances become visible. They say it in the specific quality of the silence that follows when you mention where you live or what your father does or what kind of shoes you are wearing. He had experienced all of these silences. He had sat in rooms where the assessment of his worth happened in the first 30 seconds and had arrived at the wrong conclusion and had never been revisited regardless of what he said or did afterward. He had been rejected by her family because of what he did not have. He had been turned away by investors because of where he came from. He had been excluded from spaces that his intelligence qualified him for by people who used something other than intelligence as the qualifying criterion. He had taken all of it and he had done something with it that none of them had expected. And years later, when the world had revised its understanding of who he was, the people who had rejected him came back. Every single one of them came back. And what he did when they came back is the reason this story is being told tonight. Stay with me. Because this is not a story about revenge. It is something much more powerful than revenge. Welcome to Bishop Tales, where every week we bring you powerful, emotional, and unforgettable stories that stay with you long after the video ends. If you are new here, please subscribe right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a story like this one. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from tonight. Are you in Nigeria, Ghana, the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, South Africa, Jamaica, or somewhere else in this world? We love knowing where our family is. Now let us begin. His name was Emeka Nwosu and he was the son of a tailor. This was the fact about him that seemed to matter most to the people who decided what facts about a person mattered. His father, Emeka Nwosu, had run a small tailoring shop in the ABA market for 31 years, a shop with a faded sign above the door and a Singer sewing machine that had been repaired so many times its original parts were outnumbered by the replacement ones. And from that shop Emmanuel had produced clothing of a quality that his customers valued enormously and that the world beyond his customers had never been informed about because the world beyond his customers did not come to that part of ABA and would not have known what to do with the information if it had. Emmanuel was a skilled man doing excellent work in a space too small to be noticed by the people who decided what was excellent. He had given his son Emeka two things that would eventually prove more valuable than anything money could have provided. The first was the understanding that quality was not a function of the scale of your operation or the visibility of your work but of the standard you set for yourself in private, when nobody was watching, when cutting corners would not have been noticed by anyone except you. The second was the specific and unshakable conviction that intelligence applied with discipline and honesty produced results that were not available to any combination of privilege and ease. These two things were Emeka Nwosu's inheritance to his son, and Emeka had received them and built everything he subsequently built on their foundation. He had been a brilliant student in the specific way that makes teachers use the word brilliant carefully rather than generously, reserving it for the rare occasion when they encounter a student whose processing of information has a quality that is genuinely different from the ordinary range of good and excellent. His secondary school mathematics teacher had written in Emeka's final year report that she had been teaching for 22 years and had encountered perhaps 3 students whose mathematical intuition was of the quality she was describing, and that Emeka was one of them. His English teacher had written that his analytical clarity extended beyond mathematics into every domain of thought he applied it to. He had finished secondary school with results that opened the door to any university in the country. He had gone to the University of Lagos and studied economics and had graduated at the top of his class with a first-class degree that had been noted in the faculty record as one of the highest aggregate scores achieved in the program in 15 years. During university he had met Adiz Obi. She was the daughter of Chief Obi, a man whose wealth had been accumulated across 3 decades of contract work connected to government infrastructure projects and who had in the process of accumulation developed the specific quality of the newly established wealthy, which was the quality of treating the distinction between those who had money and those who did not as a distinction of character rather than of circumstance. Adiz herself was not her father. She was warm and genuine and had the specific quality of someone who had grown up with privilege and had not allowed privilege to make her unable to see the people who did not share it. She had met Emeka at a Student Economics Society event where he had given a presentation on informal sector dynamics in sub-Saharan Africa that had produced the specific response of a room that had encountered something it had not expected to encounter, the particular quality of an argument made with such rigorous clarity that it left you with fewer comfortable assumptions than you had arrived with. She had introduced herself afterward. They had talked for 2 hours. She had called her best friend that evening and said she had met someone. They had dated throughout their final year of university with the specific ease of two people who are well matched in the things that matter and who are discovering this through the daily evidence of being together rather than through the performance of compatibility. He was the kind of company she valued because he made her think and because he was honest about things that honesty cost him something on and because he was interested in her as a full person rather than as a function of what she was in his social environment. She was the kind of company he valued because she was genuinely warm and because she was honest about her own thinking in a way that required trust in him and because she held him to a standard of intellectual honesty that did not allow him to take shortcuts. They were good for each other in the ways that count and they both knew it. When they approached graduation and the natural question of the future arose, Adiz brought Emeka to meet her family with the specific combination of certainty and nervousness of someone who knows what she wants and is not certain the people she loves will receive it well. Chief Obi received Emeka with the particular quality of attention that powerful men give to the people they are assessing, total in its focus and predetermined in its conclusion. He noted the tailoring shop in ABA. He noted the absence of property or investment in Emeka's family background. He noted the first-class degree without the network that was supposed to come with it in his understanding of how worth was constituted. He had the conversation with Adiz that evening in his study that fathers who have decided on an outcome have with their daughters, the conversation that was framed as concern and functioned as instruction. He said Emeka was a fine young man. He said fine young men from humble backgrounds became fine old men from humble backgrounds unless they had something specific working in their favor. He said he did not see what was specifically working in Emeka's favor. He said Adiz deserved someone who could offer her the life she was used to. He said these things with the full authority of a man who had spent 30 years making decisions and had never had the decisions overturned. He expected this decision to follow the same pattern. Adiz did not immediately comply with her father's assessment. She was not her father's daughter in the dimension of using wealth as a measure of worth. She pushed back. She said Emeka was the most capable person she had met in 4 years of university. She said capability was what created the life her father was asking for. She said her father had built his own wealth and should understand that wealth was built by people rather than inherited by them, except when it was inherited, which was the condition her father appeared to be requesting for his daughter. Chief Obi had looked at his daughter with the specific mixture of pride and frustration that intelligent parents feel when their children use the intelligence they have been given to argue against conclusions the parents have reached. He had said he was not dismissing Emeka. He was asking for time. He was asking for evidence. He was asking Adiz to be patient and to see whether what she believed about Emeka was confirmed by what Emeka produced. He said if in 2 years Emeka had demonstrated something, he would revisit his position. He said it with the tone of someone who expected the condition to naturally dissolve the problem rather than the condition to be met. Emeka had come to ABA for that conversation with Chief Obi. He had sat across from a man whose entire body language communicated the assessment he had already made and he had listened to the condition with the specific composure of someone who is deciding in real time what to do with what they are hearing. He had said he understood. He had said he respected Chief Obi's position as a father. He had said he intended to demonstrate what he was capable of. He had said it without performance and without the bravado of someone who is trying to convince rather than state. He had said it simply, as a fact. Chief Obi had looked at him for a moment with the assessment still present in his eyes and had said he hoped so. Emeka had left the house and driven back to Lagos and sat in his apartment and made a decision about what the next 2 years were going to be about. He had already been accepted to a position at a mid-tier financial services company in Lagos that paid adequately and was respectable and that most of his fellow graduates considered a good outcome. He declined it. He had been developing a business idea for 18 months, a technology-enabled microfinance platform that addressed the specific gap between formal banking services and the informal sector where the majority of economic activity in Nigerian cities actually occurred, a gap he had written about in his degree thesis and understood from the inside through 20 years of watching his father's business operate outside the formal financial system. He had the idea with the full depth of someone who had researched it thoroughly and understood both the problem and the solution from the ground up. What he had not had was the courage to pursue it before the conversation with Chief Obi, because pursuing it required giving up the security of the adequate employment and he had not previously had a reason compelling enough to make the risk feel like the right choice. Chief Obi's dismissal of him, delivered with such authority and such certainty, had produced in Emeka a clarity about what he was going to do that no amount of encouragement had previously produced. He was going to build the thing. And when it was built, it would speak for itself. Now friends, I need to stop here because if you are watching this and the specific quality of Emeka's determination in this moment is reaching you the way it should, you are exactly where Bishop Tails wants you to be. Please like this video right now and drop a comment below. Tell us, has anyone ever dismissed you or told you that you were not enough, and what did you do with what they said? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now, because what Emeka builds across the next years and what happens when the people who rejected him come back is something that is going to stay with you for a very long time. He started the company with 47,000 naira, which was the sum total of his savings from 2 years of part-time consulting work he had done alongside his final year and the months since graduation. 47,000 naira was not enough to build a technology platform. It was enough to begin. He began. He taught himself to code from free resources because he could not pay a developer, and because learning the technical foundation himself was the difference between understanding what he was building and commissioning what he was building, and he had decided that the former was the only acceptable relationship between a founder and their product. He took 12 months to learn enough to build the first version himself, 12 months of 16-hour days during which he also worked 3 days a week at a data analysis consultancy that a university contact had given him access to and which paid him enough to keep himself alive and the company's small expenses covered. The first version of the platform was not impressive by the standards of the technology products that existed in the market. It was functional. It did what it needed to do, which was allow small business owners and market traders in 2 specific areas of Lagos to access small credit facilities through a mobile interface without the documentation requirements and waiting periods that made formal banking inaccessible to them. The interest rates were fair. The repayment structure was designed by someone who understood how irregular the cash flows of informal sector businesses actually were and had built a repayment model that reflected this rather than ignoring it. The user experience was simple because Emeka had designed it for the specific user rather than for himself, had spent 40 hours in the markets talking to potential users about their phone habits and their comfort with digital transactions before writing a single line of code. The first 22 users were people he had recruited personally from those 40 hours of market conversations. All 22 repaid their first loans. The model was working. He had tried to raise investment across the first year. He had approached 8 investors, some through connections from university, some through the small but growing Lagos startup ecosystem that was beginning to develop structures for early-stage funding. 6 of them had declined at the first meeting. The reasons given were the reasons that are always given when investors decline things they are not sure about: insufficient traction, unproven unit economics, team risk, market uncertainty. These were real considerations, but Emeka was also aware that the room read differently when he was in it than when the founders of similar companies, founders from more visible backgrounds with more legible credentials in the investor's understanding of credentials, were in it. He was aware of this, and he did not allow himself to dwell on it, because dwelling on what was unfair about a situation was a tax on the energy that the situation required for addressing. He addressed it by continuing to build. The traction became sufficient. The unit economics proved themselves. 2 of the 6 who had declined in the first meeting came back in the second year after seeing the numbers. He took the first investment in the 18th month. It was small, but it was real, and it allowed him to hire 1 developer and 1 community relationship manager, both of whom he had identified from his university network as people who understood the mission and were willing to accept below-market salaries for equity in a company they believed in. The team of 3 moved faster than the team of 1 had moved, and the platform expanded from 2 areas of Lagos to 12 areas within 6 months of the first hire. The user base grew from 22 to over 4,000. The loan repayment rate was 91%, which was significantly above the industry average for microfinance, and which told the story of a model that had been designed with genuine understanding of its users rather than with the understanding that formal financial models typically brought to informal sector lending. He and Adiz had maintained their relationship across these years with the specific difficulty and the specific clarity of 2 people who are certain about each other and uncertain about the conditions that surround what they are certain about. They spoke regularly and saw each other when the distance and their respective schedules allowed. Adiz had taken a position in a healthcare consultancy in Lagos and was building her own career with the same focused attention she had always brought to things that mattered. She knew everything about the company, was his first sounding board for every significant decision, and had never once suggested that the difficulty of the period was a reason to revise her assessment of what they were building toward. She held the certainty with the patience of someone who has decided what is true and is willing to wait for the conditions to catch up with the truth. Chief Obi had not explicitly renewed his position. He had not retracted it either. He had maintained a watchful silence that communicated ongoing assessment, which was its own form of pressure because ongoing assessment is not the same as ongoing approval and the people under it know the difference. Emeka knew the difference and had decided that the only response to ongoing assessment was to give the assessment more to look at, which was what he was doing. His mother had told him once that the people who require you to prove yourself before they accept you are teaching you exactly how strong your foundation needs to be, and that a foundation built under that kind of scrutiny was stronger than a foundation built in the absence of it. He had held this thought like a lamp in the periods when the scrutiny felt heavier than the progress. In the third year the company reached a scale that produced the specific kind of visibility that scale in a specific market produces when it crosses a threshold. 47,000 active users. A loan repayment rate that had become a case study reference in a central bank discussion paper about financial inclusion. A second funding round from an impact investment fund that was specifically interested in financial inclusion models with documented social outcomes. Articles in 3 publications that covered the technology and finance space. An invitation to present at a Continental Technology Conference that Emeka had attended as a paying delegate 2 years before. The company was no longer a startup in the sense of being unproven. It was a company with proof of concept at scale and the specific momentum that comes from that proof being visible to the people who track these things. Chief Obi called. He did not call Emeka. He called Adiz. He said he had been following what the young man was doing. He said he had been wrong in his initial assessment. He said he would like to have a conversation. Adiz told Emeka. Emeka sat with this for a day. He thought about the conversation in the sitting room in ABA, the quality of Chief Obi's assessment, the tone of its delivery, the 2-year condition that had been set with the expectation that it would not be met. He thought about what he wanted the response to this phone call to look like and what it said about him. He said he would meet with Chief Obi. They met at the chief's house on a Saturday. Emeka drove himself in the car he had bought from his salary in the second year, a modest car that was entirely paid for and that he had chosen because it was reliable rather than because it communicated anything. He wore the suit he wore to important meetings, well-made and appropriate and entirely itself. He arrived on time. The chief met him at the door, which was not how the first meeting had gone, and shook his hand with both of his, which communicated something that the handshake in the first meeting had not communicated. He led him into the sitting room and they sat, and there was a quality to the sitting room that was different from the quality of the sitting room 3 years ago. The chief had aged in ways that were visible, not dramatically but in the specific way that 3 years aged someone who was already in the later part of their life. But the eyes were the same, sharp and assessing, and what they were assessing had changed. Chief Obi said he had been wrong. He said it directly, which was not nothing for a man who had spent 30 years making decisions that were not revisited. He said he had made an assessment of Emeka based on the circumstances of Emeka's background rather than on the quality of Emeka's character and capacity, and that the assessment had been wrong in its method and wrong in its conclusion. He said he had watched what Emeka had built across 3 years with the specific attention of someone who knows they were wrong and is watching for the evidence that confirms it. He said the evidence was clear and comprehensive, and he was not a man who ignored clear and comprehensive evidence. He said he gave his blessing to Emeka and his daughter. He said he would be glad to have Emeka in his family. He said he was sorry it had taken this long. Emeka looked at the older man across the sitting room. He thought about several things simultaneously. He thought about the 47,000 naira. He thought about 12 months of teaching himself to code from free resources on a laptop that overheated if he used it for more than 4 hours continuously. He thought about the 6 investors who had said no at the first meeting and the 40 hours in the markets and the 22 first users and the 91% repayment rate and the case study in the central bank paper. He thought about Adiz's certainty across 3 years of uncertain conditions. He thought about his father's Singer sewing machine. He thought about the specific quality of a standard maintained in private when nobody is watching. He thought about what he wanted to do with the man's apology and what the doing of it would say about who he was. He said he accepted the apology. He said it without hesitation and without the performance of graciousness, simply as a genuine response to a genuine apology. He said he understood why Chief Obi had made the assessment he had made, not that the method was right but that it was the method many people used and that the people who used it were often not aware that they were using it. He said he had learned something from the 3 years of the condition being set that he would not have learned otherwise, which was what he was capable of when the only available motivation was the quality of the work itself rather than the approval of anyone watching. He said he was glad to have Adiz. He said he had always been glad to have Adiz. He said he hoped they could build a good relationship from here. Chief Obi looked at him for a long moment. Then he said his daughter had chosen well. He said it with the specific quality of someone who means it rather than someone who is saying it because the situation requires it. Emeka said he knew. He said that had always been the truest thing about the situation. The wedding was a year later. It was a celebration in the full sense of the word, not just of two people but of everything that had been built and everything that had been endured and the specific quality of a love that had been tested by the conditions around it and had remained what it was throughout. Emeka Nwosu, the tailor from ABA, sat at the high table in a suit he had made himself with the specific care of a man making the most important garment of his working life. His Singer sewing machine had produced clothing for 31 years and the most important thing it had ever produced was in this room, the character of the son who had built a platform used by over 60,000 people in the informal economy and who was sitting at this table with the kind of woman who had chosen him when he had nothing and was still the same woman with him now that he had something. Emmanuel sat at the high table and watched his son and felt the specific quiet pride of a man whose life's work had produced something he could not have built with his hands but had built nonetheless. The investors who had said no at the first meeting sent congratulations. Two of them had subsequently invested in the company and their investments were among the decisions they were most satisfied with in their portfolios. The third meeting investor, the one who had been most dismissive, had sent a message through a mutual contact asking whether there was still an opportunity to invest at the latest round. Emeka had replied through his investment manager with the standard process document and had not added anything personal to the response. The process would determine whether the investment was appropriate at the current terms. That was the process and it applied to everyone equally. 3 months after the wedding the company closed a Series B funding round that valued it at a number that appeared in the financial press with the specific quality of a number that produced reactions in people who read it. It was a real number built from real evidence and real outcomes for real users and Emeka had arrived at it through the specific method he had always used, the method his father had taught him without teaching it, which was to do the work at the standard the work deserved in private, when nobody was watching, until the work itself became the argument for everything else. Adiz had been there through all of it. She had been there when there was no Series A and no Series B and no case study in the central bank paper and no articles in the finance publications and no conference invitation and no congratulations from the investors who had said no. She had been there when there was a laptop that overheated and 47,000 naira and a first-class degree and a man who had decided what he was going to do with the dismissal. She had been there because she had seen him clearly from the beginning, in the Economic Society meeting room where he had made an argument that left people with fewer comfortable assumptions than they had arrived with, and what she had seen had been sufficient for the certainty she had maintained across all the years of insufficient conditions. At the dinner to celebrate the Series B, held at a restaurant that Emeka had chosen because it was excellent rather than because it was expensive, which was the distinction he had always made between the two things that people with new money and people with old money confused, he had said something that the people at the table had talked about for a long time afterward. He had stood and thanked the people who had been with him through the building. He had thanked his father in ABA, who was at the table and who received the thanks with the quiet dignity of someone who has always known what their contribution was and has not needed it to be publicly acknowledged to know its value. He had thanked Adiz with the specific honesty of a man who understands that gratitude is not a performance but an accurate accounting of who made what possible. He had thanked his team with the individual specificity of someone who knew what each person had contributed rather than thanking them as a collective abstraction. And then he had said something about the people who had not believed in him. He had not named them. He had not gestured toward the absence of them or the presence of those who had come around. He had said that the people who told him he was not enough had given him something that the people who believed in him had not been able to give him in the same way, which was the specific and complete knowledge of what he was building and why that only arrives when the building is not being done for anyone's approval. He said he was grateful for both kinds of people in his life. He said he meant it without performance. He said the rejection had clarified something that the encouragement had not been able to clarify, which was that the work was worth doing for what it produced for the people it served and not for what it produced for his own position in the assessment of anyone watching. He said he hoped he never forgot this. He said he intended to make sure he did not. Chief Obi was at the dinner. He had been invited because he was Adiz's father and because Emeka had decided that the invitation was the right thing and that right things should not be withheld because they were difficult. He sat at the table and he listened to what his son-in-law said about the people who had not believed in him and he sat with it in the way of someone who recognizes themselves in a description and who is deciding what to do with the recognition. When the dinner was over he found Emeka and said one more thing to him privately. He said he had been one of those people. He said he knew. He said he was glad Emeka had built it anyway. He said he was glad the building had been for the right reasons. Emeka looked at him. He said he was glad too. He said he was glad for all of it, the condition and the 3 years and the 47,000 naira and the overheating laptop and the 40 hours in the markets. He said all of it had been necessary. Chief Obi said not all of it was his doing. Emeka said no. He said some of it had been his doing. He said it without anger and without the reassuring falseness of pretending that what had been done had not been done. He said it accurately. Chief Obi nodded. He said yes. He said some of it had been his doing and he was sorry for that part. Emeka said he knew. He said they were going to build something good from here and that was the only direction available. Chief Obi said yes. He said that was exactly right. Emeka Nwosu drove back to Aba the following morning in the car that Emeka had bought him the previous year, a car that was reliable and comfortable and that his father had initially said was too much. Emeka had said it was not enough. Emmanuel had said his son was always going to argue with him. Emeka had said he had learned it from somewhere. Emmanuel had said that was not true and had gotten into the car. He drove back to Aba and he opened his shop and he sat at his Singer sewing machine and he began the work that was on his table, a set of clothing for a wedding that was happening the following weekend. He worked with the full care of someone who has never done the work any other way, the care that he had practiced for 31 years and that had produced the son who was in the newspapers and in the central bank paper and who had given a speech the previous evening about building for the right reasons. He sat at the machine and he worked and he thought about the son who had learned without being taught that quality was not about the scale of your operation but about the standard you set for yourself in private, when nobody was watching. He thought his own father had taught him that. He thought he had taught it to his son. He thought that was the most important thing one generation gave to the next and that it was more durable than money and more useful than connections and more available to anyone willing to apply it than any other resource in the world. He thought this and he worked and the needle went in and out and the fabric took the shape it was being given and the morning light came through the window of the shop with the faded sign and landed on the work the way morning light lands on things that are being done correctly, simply and without ceremony, because that is what the work deserves. If this story reached you tonight, please share it with someone who needs to hear it right now. Like this video and subscribe to Bishop Tales for powerful emotional stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell us where you are watching from, and tell us this: has anyone ever told you that you were not enough, and what did you do with what they said? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. There are many more stories coming and they go deeper than this one every time. Thank you for watching Bishop Tales. We will see you in the next story.